This is my ELU router. It's the MOF96. I bought it in 1988 and it's been brilliant. I've used it, well, most weeks in that time, and it's performed perfectly. The last time I was using it, a couple of weeks ago, I noticed it seemed to be running very slowly, and then I could smell a burning smell, and so I turned it straight off, and when I checked it I found that the armature was completely jammed up. You couldn't turn this at all, the cutter wouldn't turn, and it was solid, so I suspected it was a bearing. I took the bits off, and I took this ring off here to get to the bearing, and I was able to pour some oil down into the bearing, and I did manage to free it off just to test it and make sure it wasn't actually burnt out, and by pouring oil in there I freed it off. But it is very noisy, and the only real cure is to put a new bearing in. Now looking at it, it looks quite a complicated job. To get to the armature, to get the bearing out, you've got to undo 4 screws which are situated in under here, under this base plate, down in here. You can't see them very well on the camera. They're down here. There's one there. There's 4 in total. But you need to take all of this base plate piece off here to get to them. And at first thought, it's almost impossible to get to it. But when you study it, what it is, there's a parallel pin down in here. There's a small pin goes through there which holds this leg in the base plate. The other side, there's also a pin, but you can't get this one out because although you can see the end of it, it's blocked off at this end down here, so you can't actually take that pin out. So there's another way of getting into there, and I believe what you have to do is remove this switch cover. So I'll undo those 2 screws now. Take this little cover off. It's a tedious job. It looks very awkward to do actually, but it's got to be done. I mean, it will actually work as it is now, as with the oil in the bearing, but it's very noisy. You take this cover off, which is a bit tight, so you need a screwdriver in. There you go. Take that off, and you'll see the actual on-off switches in there, and there the cable restraint on there and the grommet. And down in here where this post comes up, what you have to do, you have to put the router down, place it in its lowest position and tighten the knob up, and then down inside there, and you won't be able to see it on the camera because I can't really show it, but down inside there's a large circlip, and I believe if you remove that circlip, it will allow, after removing the pin the other side obviously, it will allow this bottom piece to come right off to gain access to those 4 screws. So what I'm going to do, the circlip's going to be a bit of a fiddle, so I'm going to lose that, and I'm going to knock this pin out first and see how we get on with that. You'll need a small parallel pin punch like this to do that. If you haven't got one, you can fashion a nail or something. I'm using just a small hammer, and hopefully I can knock that pin out. There you go, it's coming out the other side. Hasn't come right out because I don't think the punch is quite long enough actually. There we go. I think I'll get something else and just tap in there. Right, I haven't got a pin punch quite long enough to go through there, so what I've done, I've just got a 2.5 inch nail. I'll just cut the end off, and that should be enough just to tap it through. There we go, it's got that out now. And there's a little parallel pin called a Transex pin, whatever you want to call it, a split pin. Put that aside, don't lose it. So that's that side, that should be free now. But you've got to lock this back again to get to that awkward circlip, which is down in here somewhere. Can't even see it. Should be able to release that. There you go. That's the circlip out, I think. Something's happened anyway. It's an awkward thing to get to. I've got the circlip off the rod, but it's a job getting the circlip actually out of the unit. I can see it, I can feel it, but it won't come out. There must be a way of getting that out somehow. Oh, there's part of it. That's a stupid thing. They don't give you much room. Oh, that's a right thing. Well folks, it looks like we're stuck. This is a very good demonstration, isn't it? Might be easier if I took those screws out and got the switch out of the way. I can see what I'm doing then. Well, I've managed to get the circlip off, but I don't know how the hell I'm going to get it back on again. I had to prise it off, force it off actually. I've taken the grommet off so I can get in and see a bit better, but it didn't make much difference in the end. I just forced it out, so it's going to be a devil's own job getting it back in if I ever do. Anyway, now we'll try and take this off. I'm not convinced that I needed to actually remove that pin, having done so, because by loosening this, there you are, it's all pulling apart anyway, and I think I could have left that pin in. Be careful with the springs, obviously. Well, this is the first time I had this apart, so I have no idea. So there's the base plate. I'm going to take the springs off. That's a great long thing. Oh, there's a little tube in there as well. Pop that in there, look. There's a little brass tube. Don't know what, oh, that goes in there like that. And the same on that side. We'll pop that in there. That must be where the circlip goes underneath there. Alright, well that's got the bottom bit off. Again, I don't think it was actually necessary to take that pin out because the whole thing's come out like that. I have to watch there's no more bits up inside there. I can't see where it doesn't appear to be. So I'll put that aside for the moment. The next job to do is to take these screws. You'll notice I've left this top piece on at the moment. That's obviously got to come off. But I've left it on because it's easier to stand it up and take these screws off. I'll take that knob off out the way just in case. Helps a bit. Every little helps, as they say. Make sure you get them on the right way around because they are different. There's 4 screws in here to undo. You can see the bearing better in there now. It's not so bad now. I put some oil in it and left it for a few days. You could actually use it, but you can feel it rumbles, so it indicates it's worn out anyway. And it did seize up before. I'll take these 4 screws out. I haven't been looking forward to doing this job because although I'm used to repairing electrical appliances, I find this quite fiddly actually. It just seems a fiddly thing to do. It's not the electrical part, it's getting that damn circlip on that worries me. Oh, I shouldn't say damn, I've been told off for saying that before now. I'll have to edit that bit out. That's 3, 1 more to go. Before I pull the bottom off, I'm gonna, with the armature, it'll come out with the armature probably, I shall take the top bit off and remove the brushes, the motor brushes. There's the screws for that. 4 of those. Make sure you don't lose any parts, that's the main thing. I probably will now I've said that. Right, that's the 4 screws out. That would come off now, but I'm not going to do that. There's that horrible circlip out the way. Right, take the top cover off. I have had the top off before because I had a look in there to see how to get it apart, and you have to watch it because the little speed dial drops out, so make sure you don't lose that. There we go, that speed dial, it's just loose on there. Oops, 1 bit more on that one. There's a fiddly thing. Alright, there's the top piece. This is the electronic part that gives you the various speeds. You don't need to disconnect the wires because you can just hang it over the side, I would imagine. Be careful with this. That's the little knob there, that's the speed control knob, and there's the little control, that's a potentiometer in there which that fits into to adjust the speed, so take that carefully and put it aside. And then on the top here, this is a little, looks like a little magnet. I imagine that's just a push bit. That's the piece that sends the signals, a magnetic force around this piece here. There'll be a coil in there, I'd imagine, and this feeds the information to the electronics in there to give you the speed control. I'm just going to have a look and see if I can prise that little magnet off without breaking it. It's got to come off because I imagine, I don't know, it might be able to go through without. Perhaps I'll take the brushes out first just in case. I might be able to leave it on. I'm not replacing the top bearing because I think that's okay. This looks a fiddly. It's a real fiddle, this is. I wouldn't fancy doing many of these for a living. Everything seems fiddly. Much better when they have the carbon brushes with a little cover on the outside and you can just unscrew it and change the brushes. This looks a major thing to do. fiddly. I don't like fiddly things, my hands are too big. That's the one disadvantage of having large hands. There's the cover there. You can see the little brushes. Well, there's the brush holder there, and the brush will sit inside there. It's a little wire that feeds it. If you're not sure about any of this, what you want to do is get your camera and take a few pictures of it before you take it apart, so you get a good idea, or draw a little diagram. There's a little printed circuit board in there to do with the speed control as well. That's the one brush that side, and then the other brush that side. I'll take that screw out first. God, I'll never get this back together again, will I? I hope you can see what I'm doing, because I can't retake it once I've got it apart. That's it. Nothing's broken so far. So far. Doesn't mean it won't. But so far it's been okay. Oops. So I've got that. I'll just get a pair of long nose pliers and see if I can pull that out. I don't seem to want to come out, those brushes. Everything's awkward in this. I would have thought that would have just pulled out actually. It does. Oh, sorry, you can't see, can you? I'm going to move the camera a little bit. That's better. Be careful you don't squash these brush holders, otherwise the brush will jam in it, and then you'll have further problems with poor commutation, sparking and things like that, and it'll cut out. I'm making a right pig's ear of this. There we go, there's one brush out, look. You don't need to disconnect it, you can just leave it loose like that, it won't do any harm. Same on the other side. Just as awkward, there's a wire, some wires go across the top, be careful with those. Just push them out of the way for the time being. Here's me telling you to take a photograph, and I didn't take one myself, so hopefully I know it goes back together. We'll soon find out, won't we? If there's any swearing to take place, I'll try and turn the camera off first. It's cursing. Oh, I just pulled the little wire off the brush holder, but that won't matter because it's easier actually. There you go. That's the other brush there. Now you'll see on that brush, if you look at a brush and it's nice and shiny like that, with no burn on the edges, that indicates that it's been running nicely, good commutation, and no excessive sparking, because it's nice and shiny all the way through. And also, if you look at the brushes, they are both evenly worn. Now, if one brush is a lot shorter than the other, and it looks a little bit burnt on the edges, what it means is, it doesn't mean the armature's actually had it, or the motor's faulty. What it means is that brush with the burning on, and the shorter one, it's probably been sticking in the holder. As you can see, they must move freely, because they do gradually wear down, and as they're wearing down, they must move in the holder. Well, if you imagine, if it gets tight, if you squash that, or even if it was squashed in production or something, and this can't move freely, as that wears down, it barely touches the armature, the part that's going round, and eventually it gets a poor contact, and it starts to burn, and you'll see the burning on the brush. The fact that they're nice and shiny means that's been running nicely. So, and they're perfectly long. They'll last for donkey's years like that. Right, that's that part. Now, as far as I can see, that I should be able to pull that whole lot out and leave the magnet intact. I might have to take it off yet to get it apart, because I might have to tap it gently. But officially, that should come off. It is loose. It's very loose. Okay, something's happening. I'm going to tap it with a little hammer if you're not looking. If in doubt, give it a clout. That's my motto. Have a look at the other end. Seems to be alright. Something's happening. There you go. Oh, look at that. I'm going to have to stop and blow my nose a minute. Hang on. It's all this excitement. I'll move those brush out the way, else I'm going to break that or something. There we go. There we are. Look at that. Now, there we go. That's the armature. As I said, you don't, unless you're replacing that bearing. Actually, that is a bit noisy. I perhaps might have replaced that as well. I don't know whether I got one of those in stock. I certainly didn't order one, but if it's a normal size, I might have one in my box of bits. As you can tell, they can hear that. That's the one that's causing the problems. It's the one where all the muck gets around that area. Make sure you get that little cover in properly under the field coils. And if you look at the armature on here, you can see it's not okay. It looks a bit darker there than the nice copper here, but it looks perfectly healthy to me. There's no burning. If it was arcing and causing problems, the edges of that would be quite well burnt, and they look fairly formed. You know, it's a good idea just to give it a gentle rub round with a bit of very fine wet and dry just to clean it up, but it doesn't matter. It's perfectly healthy actually. Now the next thing I've got to do is get that out of the end cap. So what I'm going to do is just get a wooden mallet and give it a clout and see if it comes out. That rhymes. Give it a clout, see if it comes out. So here's my giant hammer. Hey, look how that's going. Well, that's strange. I didn't expect that to happen. It's come out of the bearing and left the bearing in, which might make things easier. And note that little fan on there, which is just a push bit. It's got a squared on the shaft. I expect it only goes on one way, but make sure you get it on the right way round. Just put that aside a minute. You'll see the bearing in there, and it appears that there are 3 screws in there holding the bearing in place. I thought the bearing would just push fit in there. Actually, this is better because it's much easier to get that bearing out. So I'm just going to undo those screws in there. There are 3 screws. Well, that's not good enough, that screwdriver. I want a better screwdriver for that. I'll try this one. Well, that's better. Good old-fashioned screwdriver. None of this electronic nonsense. Whoops. Good quality Spirolux traditional woodworking screwdriver. That's the job. And the little screws. Well, this is going on a bit. I didn't expect it would take this long. I might have to stop and have a break in a minute. I've got a sore throat. Just take that little plate. It should come off now. There we go. There's the little plate. You can see it's an oily mess under there. That's not the bearing, that's me. Because I poured a lot of oil in there the other day to try and free it off. The reason for doing that wasn't necessarily to solve the problem. It was just that I thought I wanted to make sure the armature itself was working okay, because if the armature was burnt out, I didn't want to go to all the trouble of messing around, because it probably wouldn't be worth repairing. Now all we've got to do now is just tap that bearing out. So, whoops, there's the other little screw there. The best way is to get something, I mean it doesn't matter actually, that hammer, I could use 2 hammers. I know I shouldn't do. I'll just try it gently first. I might have to put it in the vise. Whoops. I need a bigger hammer. We'll try this first. If it doesn't work, I'll put it on the... Shouldn't be doing this really. Shouldn't hit another hammer with a hammer. But look at that. Piece of cake. It's so loose, so I thought it would just pop out. I'm just doing it gently. And there's the whoops. There's the offending bearing. Doesn't seem too bad now it's out actually. But nevertheless, it needed doing. So all we've got to do now basically is put it back together and put a new bearing in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn the camera off now and have a little break and have a think about it, and I'll clean the bits up, get all the rubbish out, because you don't want to see all that, and then I'll turn back on again when I'm putting it together. Okay?